Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be going over my absolute favorite books of 2022 thus far. I've read so many great books this year, and narrowing it down to a shorter list of my favorites was very difficult. I initially wanted to do a top 10, but that's just not possible. I think I have 15 books here to talk about. I have some honorable mentions because they're all just great books and I can't narrow down this list. I do have a top 3 though, so those are definitely my top 3 so far. Who knows if that will change? Who knows if I'll read any other books later this year that will completely top those 3 books that are currently in my top 3, but we shall see. As of me filming this video, I've already read 101 books. Not gonna get into how crazy that is, but exactly 50 of those 101 books were either a 4-star, a 4.5, or a 5-star. So picking my favorites was very difficult because I had a list of 50 books to go off of. A few of the books were rereads though, so I will not be including those in my list. And there are definitely some books where my feelings change towards them as time goes by. Sometimes I feel a stronger connection to the book after I finished it, after time has gone by and I really thought about the book. And other books I really enjoyed like in the moment. My emotional reaction was very strong, but now looking back, I wouldn't rate them as highly as I did when I had read them. So for each of these books, I'm not going to go too in depth in terms of their plot or anything. I'll just mention what I rated them, their genre, and just a very quick snippet, I guess, of what they're about. But for my honorable mentions, I have 5 of them here that were great books and they just didn't quite make my absolute favorites so far, but I definitely really liked them, really enjoyed them. And so the first one is The Lost Queen by Signy Pike, and this is a fantasy that takes place in the 6th century CE, so early medieval period in what is now Scotland, and it's historical fantasy, but the fantasy element isn't very strong. It's definitely more historical fiction, but with an Arthurian legend twist to it. So I really enjoyed this book. And then we have East of Eden, which I recently read, and I did not know what to expect, but I was blown away by the story and really liked this book. So that definitely deserves an honorable mention. Then we have The Man Who Died Twice, which is book number 2 in the Thursday Murder Club series. And this is an ongoing series by Richard Osman, and I am loving this series so far. I have read the first 2 books and the 3rd book is coming out soon, so I'm really excited for that. And then we have a fantasy called Daughter of the Moon Goddess. This is an adult fantasy. I'm generally a little wary of adult fantasy because I don't like smut in my books. There are certain instances where I don't mind it as much, but in terms of the way that a lot of adult fantasy and new adult fantasy has smut, I can't stomach it. But in this book, there was none of that. It was a very clean book. And honestly, the best part was the world, the descriptions, the writing was just absolutely beautiful. And I really enjoyed this book. And then my last honorable mention is Deadly Devotion by Sandra Orchard. I also recently read this. It is a Christian romantic suspense. Very light on the romance, thankfully, because I was a little nervous about that. I didn't want it to be so romance heavy that the suspense and the mystery element was not there, but the mystery was really good. And yeah, 4 stars, really enjoyed it. All right, now on to my list. So like I said, I couldn't narrow it down to a top 10, but I have a top 14 of the year so far. Hopefully by the end of the year, I'll be able to have like a top 10 list of the entirety of 2022. But for now, I have 14 favorites. I have ranked these, although this ranking could definitely change. My thoughts change, my feelings change, but as of now, this is the order that I would put these books. So at number 14, we have The Martian. And when I initially read this, I had a very strong emotional reaction to the ending, the last chapter. I was just so invested and it was intense, emotionally intense, and it was really good. And I have given it a 5-star rating. Looking back now, it's more a 4.5 star. There were a couple instances in the book where I was definitely taken out of the story, and it has more to do with the fact that it's very science and physics heavy, but the story itself was really good. And yeah, that is number 14. At number 13, we have Dreams Lie Beneath by Rebecca Ross, and she is definitely a go-to author for me for YA fantasy. She has started writing adult fantasy now as well, and I'm really excited to try out those books. And this is set in a world where there's this curse and people have very intense nightmares, and we have wardens who are people that are tasked to basically fight these nightmares. So at every new moon, the nightmares become like sentient almost. They roam the streets in the different villages, and so the wardens are going out and fighting these nightmares basically, and it's a way to protect the people because those nightmares can actually like hurt them, can harm them and things like that. And it's a really interesting concept, and I really liked it. It was an enemies to lovers trope as well, which I really, really love. What really stood out was the world and the world building and the writing. I love Rebecca Ross's writing. So really, really enjoyed this one, and that is number 13. And then at number 12, we have Under the Tulip Tree, which is a Christian fiction, although the Christian, like the faith element, wasn't very strong until the second half of the book. But it's a beautiful story. It's dual timeline, so we're in the Great Depression, and then we're also in the Civil War era in Tennessee, if I'm not mistaken. I think this book was set in Tennessee. And so in the modern day, we have a woman who is struggling to survive. Basically, it's the Great Depression. Her whole family is struggling. She basically has to work for her family's survival. So her father isn't working. He had worked for a bank, but that was completely destroyed because of the market crash, as were many other families. And so she is basically hired by the government. It's this amazing opportunity she's given to make some money by interviewing former slaves. And so she interviews this lady, and she is very, very old. I think she's over 100. And so we get insight into her experience during the Civil War era, obviously slavery. And so we have her giving these stories, and like they're like flashbacks. So we have this woman's stories as well from the Civil War, and it's a very, very impactful read. I really enjoyed it. At number 11, we have The Forsyte Saga, and I really, really enjoyed this book. I think I gave it 4 stars, but I just find myself thinking about it so often, and it's one of those books where it's a slice of life, but over many generations, and we start in the late Victorian era, and we go to the, I think, World War II, if I remember correctly, World War II era, but it covers multiple generations of the Forsyte family, and this book was just an incredible look at possession and monetary gain and what it looks like when your possessions mean everything to you, but then when they're taken away, what do you have? What matters to you in life? And it was a very impactful book for me. I really, really enjoyed it. And I really liked that the main characters are in the middle class in British society, and yeah, it was just a very, very interesting look at their lives. All right, on to the top 10. So at number 10, we have Station 11, which was a crazy ride. It was very appropriate for the times that we have been living. So it starts off with a pandemic, and then we follow multiple characters as the world has basically collapsed, and 99% of the population has been wiped out, and it's phenomenal. I loved it. At number 9, we have Fountains of Silence by Ruta Sepetys, which, wow, this book, just beautiful. It really, really impacted me emotionally. So this one takes place in the 1950s in Spain, when they were under this dictatorship that was very reminiscent of what Nazi Germany was like, but this dictatorship continued on after World War II, which is insane, and lasted until the 70s. And so we're following a couple characters as they are navigating Spain during this time. One of them is a native of Spain. She's grown up there. She works at a very affluent hotel that has a lot of American tourists coming through. And then our other protagonist is one of those American tourists, and he is a aspiring photographer. And so he learns a lot about Spain and its culture under this dictatorship through his photography, literally through the camera lens. And it's just a beautiful story. Highly, highly recommend. I have also finished the Little House on the Prairie series this year, and most of the books would have been in this top 14 list, but I couldn't do that because there are so many other books that I wanted to talk about. But my favorite out of the Little House on the Prairie books that I've read is These Happy Golden Years. It is when Laura Ingalls is finally a young lady, and she is starting to have feelings for Almanza Wilder, and it's just so, so cute. Loved this book. At number 6, we have Rilla of Ingleside, which is the last book in the Anne of Green Gables series, and I finally finished that series this year. Rilla of Ingleside was just so beautiful, and I love, love, love Rilla's character. She is Anne and Gilbert's youngest daughter, and this book takes place during World War I, and it's, wow, it was sad and heartbreaking and heartwarming and just so good. Loved this book. One of my favorites in the Anne of Green Gables series for sure. All right, so now we're at number 6, and books 1 to 6 are definitely like top tier for me. So at number 6, we have Fellowship of the Ring. I only gave this book 4 stars, and I stick by that rating. I struggled a little bit in the middle. It's a lot of exposition and world building, and like you're really learning about the world. But all in all, this book is incredible, and the characters are incredible, and it 100% deserves to be in the top 6. 100%. I would be dishonest if I gave it 5 stars just because I just didn't love everything about the book and the way that certain things are described, but it's also a product of its time. It's one of the, you know, founding fathers of fantasy. It's so good, but I can't give it more than a 4 star, but it's amazing. I don't know if that makes any sense. It makes sense in my mind. I don't know. It is what it is. Okay. Number 5 is The Hero of Ages by Brandon Sanderson. This is the 3rd book in Mistborn Era 1, and it destroyed me. I spent a good hour bawling my eyes out after I finished it. It was just so good. Oh my goodness. I can't say anything about it because it is the 3rd book in the trilogy, but it is set in a world where you have people who can ingest metals. The different metals give them different powers. Some people can only use one metal for a certain power, and then other people are Mistborn. They can use all of them and have all the powers that these metals provide. And as the series goes on, you're actually introduced to more magical systems, and it's crazy, but it's so good. Loved this trilogy and can't wait to continue on with Mistborn Era 2. At number 4, we have Ross Poldark. Now, I am a huge fan of the show, and I was very nervous going into the book because I didn't know if it would live up to the feelings that I have towards the show and the characters, but I'm telling you right now, the cast is perfection. The way they cast every character in the show, it's perfect. Like the way that these characters are portrayed in the book, like I could just picture each and every character vividly, their mannerisms, the way they spoke. Like the show just, now I love the show even more because I've read the book. It's amazing. But this book takes place in the late 18th century. Ross Poldark has just returned to Cornwall. He was fighting in America in the Revolutionary War, so he was on the British side, and so he's just returned home, and things are not the way they were before. The woman he loved is engaged to someone else, and it's just a mess. His life is not in the same place as it was when he left, and he has a lot to work through emotionally. He has a lot to work through physically because his father just passed away. The farm is a complete disaster, and the story just goes from there. This book covers 5 years, and we're introduced to other characters who play an important role. This book just captured my heart. It was just so good. If you're interested in this time period and in the south of England, just read this book. So good. All right, top 3. So at number 3, we have a book that I had no idea would be in the top 3 of this list because it is manga, and I also just read it this month. So I don't want to talk about it too much because I will talk about it in my July wrap up, but that is Spy Family Volume 1. It's so good. It was amazing. I loved it. I gave a manga 5 stars. Never thought that would happen. It 100% lives up to the hype. If you're worried that it doesn't, it does. All right, at number 2, we have Jewel of the Nile by Tessa Afshar. This is a biblical fiction book by one of my favorite authors of all time. It did not disappoint. In fact, this is now my favorite Tessa Afshar. So good. So this one is about a girl named Charlene who is half Roman, half Kushite, and Kush was a kingdom south of Egypt during the time that this book is set. It is set in the early church period. And Charlene's mother had actually passed away when she gave birth. And so Charlene grew up with an aunt and her grandparents, and they're just not very emotionally present in Charlene's life, and it has to do with the fact that she is part Kushite, and she's been told her entire life that her father was killed, basically, that he's not alive anymore. And then she finds out that in fact he is, and so she goes on this journey trying to discover his identity, and it's just such a beautiful story. I loved it. And the other protagonist, his name is Theo. He is a character from a couple other Tessa Afshar books. So he was a main character in The Thief of Corinth, which I also reread this year, and that book is just so good. And then he also appears in Daughter of Rome by Tessa Afshar. And so his story arc was never completed in those books. And so in this book, he really gets that completion to his story arc, and it's just so beautiful, and I loved it. This book takes place partially on a boat along the Mediterranean Sea, and just sea voyages are so my thing. I loved it so much. It was so good. All right, do I even need to say what my number 1 book is? So for those of you who have not heard me just gush about this book, my absolute favorite book of the year so far is Yours is the Night by Amanda Dykes. This book, I really did feel every emotion reading it. It's a World War I historical fiction, but if that is something that you feel is just overdone and there are just way too many World War era historical fictions out there, I agree. But this book is so unique. It is such a special story. It is so character driven, like so character driven. The war is happening. You're in France during World War I. It's going on, but this book is about 5 individual characters and it's about them. It's not about them trying to survive the war. It's very personal and very deep and just beautiful. Loved this story so much. Man, like I felt so much anger towards the fact that war brings out the worst in humanity. I felt so much joy seeing these character arcs just come together. I felt sorrow for one of the characters, like the deepest sorrow. Like I literally felt it all reading this book. It's so beautiful. So yeah, if World War I, World War II historical fiction definitely feels overdone for you and you just kind of stay away, I totally get that. But this book is very different and very special and I love it. All right, so those are my top 14 books with some honorable mentions in there of 2022 so far. We shall see if this list changes by the end of the year. It would be nice if I read more 5-star books that end up taking precedence over the other books, but we shall see. We'll see how the rest of this year goes. But that is it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, I appreciate each and every one of you guys for taking time out of your day to listen to me ramble. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you all in my next video. Bye!